Hello friends! Today in this video we are going to talk about 9 of my favorite Gothic novels. They're not my 9 favorites, they are just the 9 that are some of my favorites that I own physical copies of. And I'm having a little bit of wine and a nice cinnamon roll. We are lazy cinnamon rolls. I just got them out of a canister. I didn't feel like doing a full from scratch baking today, but I still wanted a little treat to enjoy with our books. That is quite tasty and pairs nicely with the wine. Apologies if my energy is a little bit out there today. I'm a little overwhelmed. I just got back from the No Kings protest. You can see my sign I made. I don't always get real political on my channel, but some things are important enough to shout out. So if you're out there fighting the good fight, props to you, and I stand here with you. But Gothic novels. What exactly is a Gothic novel? So there are different definitions of a Gothic novel. There's a podcast I listen to sometimes about Gothic novels, and they have this Gothameter. And every time they discuss a book, both hosts will rate it on the Gothameter, and they have like each element. And it's interesting to see how they both rate them differently, like how Gothic is this book, because it is up to interpretation. This is going to be my definition of a Gothic novel. And so, a Gothic novel, the name comes more or less straight out of The Castle of Otranto, which was subtitled a Gothic novel. So that's where the name comes from. It was one of the first really popular books that had a lot of these elements in it, but there have been literature. I always shout out Macbeth and even Hamlet, or when I'm talking about Gothic novels, because they have a lot of these elements in them. One of the main elements is, of course, what we think of as like a Gothic castle or Gothic ruin, an abbey, very, very often a mansion, a building, but it could also be a cave or a haunted forest or a forest that might be haunted. It's some sort of setting that can be dreary, very often in decay, and it interacts with a story in a way that builds the emotions and the atmosphere. We'll see a lot of secret passages, hidden doors. Secrets in general are a big thing about a Gothic novel. One of the reasons I always shout out Macbeth as like a good example of a Gothic story is because of the quote, basically the quote that what you are imagining, like the possibility of dark things, is scarier than an actual scary thing right there in front of you. So that's why in Gothic novels there's a lot of mystery and unknown and like this space for darkness to kind of steep in like this empty echo almost. Something like a big mansion or a forest or a cave or even a smaller house can really have that like creaking, slow, eerie effect on the story. Now, they have a sense of foreboding throughout the story and a lot of heightened emotions, which is why Gothic novels are often associated with poetry and romanticism. A lot of romantic poets wrote Gothic novels, like Mary Shelley is an example of her famous story of her and Lord Byron and Percy Shelley reading ghost stories during a stormy night in this old house and being like, we all have to write a ghost story now. And she was the only one who really did anything with her story. And it was a masterpiece. The poets and the Gothic novels have that connection. You're almost like embracing the fear and the what people might say the unsavory emotions. You're embracing them along with all the other emotions, which was a big part of the Romanticism philosophy. It's not just these emotions are good and those emotions are bad. We embrace all of the emotions and we experience them fully. And so there's a lot of emotive language in this telling of a Gothic tale to really like just add those feelings that really like strum our core emotions and get us like spooked and thrilled and excited. The mystery and unknown things can also be manifested in, again, interacting with the atmosphere. So you'll hear footsteps, you'll hear a creaking door, you'll hear all of these things that just add to that creepiness and that delightful, eerie atmosphere. And because there's so much unknown, there are also often supernatural elements, although sometimes, like in the case of Jane Eyre or The Secret Garden, afterwards there ends up not being a ghost, it was just some other hidden secret or mystery, something from the past that kind of comes out of the woodworks towards the end. But that possibility of supernatural is almost always there. Additionally, because there are so many secrets and unknown things and uncertainty, there's a lot of themes of madness. Am I seeing ghosts or am I crazy? Is that a ghost in the attic or is it a crazy woman in the attic? We don't know. That's why we keep reading to find out. Another thing about Gothic novels, people will often talk about the feminine Gothic, and there's a lot of debate in that and whether or not it's something we still need to be defining and whether or not there's a difference between the feminine Gothic and the non-feminine Gothic. But it kind of goes hand in hand with my theory of why true crime is so popular among women. Embracing or exploring this darkness and these dangers helps a set of human beings that often do not feel more safe and in control to explore those themes. And a lot of times the theme of oppression and things like the yellow wallpaper or even Jane Eyre, and there's a theme of women being oppressed and fighting off the darkness that is kind of coming down on them, which could be seen literally as Gothic as a statement for women's rights, but it could also be seen as just a metaphor because in a lot of literature, sometimes women are sort of a metaphor for kind of like a divine self or like wisdom sometimes. So it depends story to story whether or not you see it as literal story to story and interpretation to interpretation, whether or not you see the theme of women being oppressed as literal statement against the state of the world or more of a metaphor of a sense of self, true self, just escaping or fighting back against the darkness of the world in general. Yeah, there are other interpretations of the word Gothic, especially in modern times. This is really the literary definition. A lot more modern Gothic books are really more of, a romantasy or YA with like Gothic frosting, which is still delightful. Who doesn't love a nice Gothic aesthetic? But some of those books have some heavier plot points and move a little faster than like this kind of a Gothic novel that is slow so that you can take your time for those creaking doors and that eeriness to like settle in. And the more plot points you have in a story, the less time you have for really sinking into those emotions. So we have our definition for the video. It doesn't have to be your definition of Gothic. It's my definition. It's what I mean when I say Gothic. But let's get into some of the books that I recommend to you if you're looking for something like that. This is in no particular order. It is the order that the books got stacked in. So first up, we have Secret Garden. It's the first Gothic book I ever read. When I was a kid, I read this book so many times. It was one of my favorites. And it is the story of a, at first, unlikable heroine who moves from India to live with her uncle after her parents died of the plague. She doesn't meet her uncle until months after she's lived in the house. He keeps himself locked away because his wife died and he's just too sad to deal with the human world at all. There is a garden that used to be his wife's like favorite place to be, and it's locked up, and Mary, doesn't know how to find it. She's determined to find the garden, and she keeps hearing all these eerie things going on in the house at night that she insists is someone crying, but all of the adults in her life keep telling her it's just the wind you hear hovering across the moor. We have our eerie atmosphere, we have our mystery, we have our haunted past, and of course, spoiler, she does find the garden and starts trying to bring it back to life. And there's all the decay of the garden everywhere. It's lovely. So next up we have Darkling by K.M. Rice. Um, so I have met K.M. Rice or Kelly a handful of times at various events. Oddly, I ran into her in Paris a couple of years ago. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened, but it was delightful. But before I ever met her, I read her book and I fell absolutely in love with it. This is so gothic. It is the story of a village girl who is sacrificed to the woods in an attempt to save their village from, I think it's a plague. And she has no idea what awaits her in the woods, except that the village elder decided that this was something that would save the village, and she cared so much about her friends and family that she volunteered to be the sacrifice. And things lurk in the woods that maybe you didn't expect. There might be some ghosts, there might be a mysterious mansion. The writing style is so exciting. She writes with such an immediate sense of excitement. You can kind of tell that she has a background in script writing, just because it's so, this is immediate, this is what's happening, and it is constantly exciting, constantly engaging. Very much recommend that book. And next up, we have Lucy Undying by Kirsten White. This is the best book I've read this year. It is the story of Lucy from Dracula, but she might not have been killed when her three suitors thought they killed Lucy the vampire. It's told in a series of letters and diary entries and oddly therapy transcripts, and it feels so much like an old Gothic novel, even though it also feels modern at the same time. It has a lesbian love story, and we get to see three different timelines going on at once. We have the diaries of Lucy before she meets Dracula. We have the therapy transcripts of everything that's happened from when she was turned to now. And then we have a third thread of another character completely who has her own mystery and sense of danger about her, who meets Lucy in present day. I know I had to go more into it in my video specifically on queer Gothic books. So then again, this is another book I talked about in my queer Gothic novels video, The Picture of Dorian Gray. It is the story of a young man in the 1800s who is very, very beautiful, very well loved. The painter makes an exquisite painting of him, and Dorian Gray, the young man, wishes that he will always look as beautiful and flawless as the painting. As time progresses, even though Dorian starts to do some very unkind and depraved things, he stays flawless and perfect and does not age, while the painting becomes marred and tainted and ugly, and he hides it up in the attic so no one will ever know. I would say it's a little less eerie than some of the other ones, although it definitely is eerie towards the end. But leading up to that point, it's a little bit more decadent and philosophical, but still very, very good. Next up, we have Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Might be butchering that name. I don't know. It sounds French. This is the story of a young girl, Laura, who lives in an isolated home out in the middle of nowhere. And one day, a woman is passing through and stops to stay with Laura for a little while due to an injury where she cannot travel. And Laura is so lonely and so happy to have a friend, but there is something off about this visitor, Carmilla, and she doesn't quite know what is going on. Meanwhile, some of the villagers keep dying and getting sick, and they have to uh, slowly unravel the the mystery. It is very sapphic and very creepy. I I do feel the ending might be a little on the outdated side, but it's still good. I still would recommend it. It's pretty short. You could probably read through it in one evening. Yeah, I highly recommend it. Even though I would still love to see an interpretation or like a reimagining with a slightly improved ending. Next up, we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. If you have never read anything by Toni Morrison, first of all, you should. Second of all, this is a really good one to try or to start with. It is a very tragic premise. I think any other author might have struggled to really like tell it in this meaningful, like beautiful way that is filled with so much love. It is the story of an escaped slave woman who kills her own children to keep them from having to go back to slavery. And the story happens years later after that event, and she's being haunted by the ghost of her daughter, essentially. There's a lot of elements of magical realism. There is a love story, like a later in life love story, which I think was really, really beautiful. Like a story of like two very jaded, world-worn people coming together. And there's just so much emphasis on the love that this mother had for her children, even though she did like something that people would think of as not a loving action, but that's how bad it was to be a slave, that she just could not handle her beloved child having to live that. It's a beautiful story, and it is like the prose is gorgeous. Yeah, it's a hard story, but it still manages to be beautiful and filled with love and joy. And it's one that you'll think about for a long time after you've read it. Next, we have The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is probably one of my all-time favorites. It is a series of short stories based off of fairy tales or their retellings, and they are so decadent and grotesque and dark and filled with rich feminist themes. The title story of The Bloody Chamber is a version of Bluebeard. And there's a scene in that that really is just the epitome of Gothic. Half of the story is the protagonist is walking from one end of the hall to the other end of the hall. And she knows there's something behind the door. She doesn't know what it is. And she's just walking, and there's creaking doors, and there's her inner monologue as she's walking. And it is half of the story. It is engaging the entire way through, but you just really have that time for that mystery and eeriness to just seep in. And I won't tell you what she finds at the end, just in case you don't know the story of Bluebeard. But I also would recommend you check out Books and Cats channel. That's where I heard about this book, and she recently revisited it in her Bluebeard video. So I would recommend you go and check that video out. This book is so good. It takes a while to read. It's not that long, but Angela Carter writes in a very gorgeous, like tangled way with a bunch of metaphors and similes all wrapped into one. So it kind of takes a while to move your brain through these complex, metaphor-rich sentences. but it is so delicious. I really love that kind of writing. Highly recommend this one. I highly recommend all of them. There aren't anything on this list that I isn't like a 10 out of 5 stars for me. So next we have A Long and Fatal Love Chase by Louisa May Alcott. What? You're saying? Louisa May Alcott? Didn't she write Little Women? How is she writing Gothic books? She had a secret pen name that she wrote a bunch of dark Gothic short stories for magazines. They were called like Blood and Thunders. A Long and Fatal Love Chase was actually not published when she wrote it. Her editor wrote to her and told her that they wanted a sensational story and like a certain length and different criteria. And she sent it to them to be published in serial and magazines. And they told her it was too sensational. And she was just like, that's literally what they asked for. But I guess it was just even too shocking to be printed in those kinds of magazines at the time. It seems strange now that it would be too like shocking to be published at the time, because from our standards there really isn't anything that like shocking about it. It starts out with a little bit of a Jane Eyre plot where this girl, she falls for this charming rich guy, and I think they're living together. There was no spice in books those days, so it's unclear about whether or not spice was going on. But she was living at this guy's house, and then she discovers, after they've been in a romance for a little while, that he is already married. So she leaves. She says, nope, that's not right. I don't want to be your mistress. I'm leaving. And he chases her across the world. He chases her all the way across the world until like there's finally a confrontation at the end. I will give you a spoiler that it is not a love story with an ending where they get together again. She is done with him. He is not done with her. It's a story of intense and scary obsession. But it is exciting, and there is, again, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but like there is like a foil to that toxic, obsessive, I don't even want to call it love, but like that toxic, obsessive ex, and then another character who loves her unconditionally without expectations. And I won't say more than that, but it is an exciting read, and I recommend it. All right, so this last recommendation, take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, I wrote it. If you think all of these books sound exciting, you might think that this one sounds exciting too. So it is Heart Splatters by me. It is the story of a woman who catches the eye of the Lord of the Manor, and she thinks all her problems are solved, but they are not. She feels very trapped in the relationship that ensues, but at the same time has nowhere else to go. Or she thinks she has nowhere else to go, because it is a villain origin story of the evil queen, and why she thinks that beauty is her only power and the only way she has to survive in the world. Obviously, that is an incorrect belief. The character Lucille dabbles in learning witchcraft. Even though she believes beauty is her only power, you can obviously see that she has other forms of power that she's using left and right, but she just only feels that beauty is the only power that other people recognize, and so she feels like that's her only true power. Because sometimes the world be like that. People only see women based on what they look like, and anything they actually do is kind of irrelevant. It has a dark and bloody ending. If you like complex female characters with kind of a deeper philosophical discussion that's being had, you might enjoy it. So yeah, there is 9 of my favorite Gothic novels that I own copies of. And if you're looking for something to read as we get towards the end here of spooky season, or even going into November and December, which traditionally is ghost story season, so the spooky stories don't have to stop just because October is over. You should check some of those out. I hope you're finding some joy even amongst the political turmoil and all of the dark things that are happening in the real world. And I'll see you in the next video.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to Ink Spills if you enjoy fairy tales, gothic literature, poetry, book recommendations, or writing.